gleaners got its name because they're the people who go back and they basically take up the second harvest. After everything has been harvested, they go through the field and they pick everything that is left. And that was left for the widows and the orphans, and they were actually commanded to leave small strips around the land in order for them to be able to harvest it on their own so that they wouldn't starve to death. So what Ruth is doing on behalf of she and Naomi, because Naomi now is older, is going out and harvesting, and she does that from early morning till late at night. And she finds favor with Boaz. Says that Ruth was quite attractive. Boaz noticed her, and he tells all of the other farmhands, make sure you don't pick on her. Make sure you leave her alone. Make sure you don't harass her. Now, what isn't spoken there is spoken very loudly, isn't it? The norm was that they harassed a lot of these women, a lot of these widows. And what Boaz is saying is, don't do it with Ruth. Well, the story moves on, and I'm going to speed it up a little bit. Ruth decides she's only going to glean in Boaz's fields. Now, normally they would go from field to field to field to field to field, wherever they could find a few heads of grain. But what you've got is Boaz telling his men, okay, when you go out and you harvest the grain, and it was wheat that they were harvesting at this particular time, and they would cut it off down low with a sickle. And it wasn't just the heads of grain, that was what the threshing floor was for. It was the whole stalk, grains and all. And what he's telling his men is, just kind of accidentally off the back of the wagon, drop some of this stuff off when Ruth is around. I think he's probably a little sweet on Ruth. You think? And so Ruth decides to stay only in Boaz's fields. Only there will she glean from the harvest. And then Naomi discovers where she's at and who she's with and how they're related. And then she pulls in this Levirate law. Now, it's a bit of a stretch, but she says the law of the Hebrews was that if there was a widow, then it was the responsibility of a brother to marry that widow and give her children so that she would have an inheritance of children to go on, and the family name would endure, and the land would be secure, because land and family were one and the same. They stayed together. So you could mortgage off your land in order to pay a debt, but eventually it had to come back to you at no charge. So when you have this other suitor that comes into the picture, not Boaz, but the other one, the reason he turns down the whole deal isn't because Ruth is unattractive, isn't because he wouldn't like the land, he just doesn't want the two together. Because you see, later on, he's got a wife, maybe not even the first one, and then later on, he's got to give the land back. It won't be his inheritance. And any children that Ruth have won't be his inheritance. They'll be hers and her husband's, even though he's dead. And that name will go on, and that land will be preserved, and that inheritance will be sure. And so it's completely economic as to why she's being turned down by this other suitor. But Boaz steps in and says, but I'll take her. And I'll purchase the land for her. And I'll make sure that she has children, so that her husband's bloodline will go on, and that her name will be secure there. But it won't be Ruth, will it? Ruth doesn't have an inheritance in Bethlehem. Who does? Naomi. He's preserving Naomi's bloodline. Naomi's inheritance, Naomi's children, which is why you get this very strange scene at the end where Grandma now is the nursemaid, which is the one taking care, and she's the one showing the whole community. Why? Because this grandchild is now her inheritance, her protector, her special child who is a redeemer as well. All of the book of Ruth is an illustration of the Hebrew word hesed. Okay? Say that. Hesed. Hesed means loving kindness. And that sounds so benign, it's really hard to use it that way. What it is, it's the kind of kindness that takes place with Boaz, who says, no, I will sacrifice this. I will make sure Naomi's bloodline is taken care of. I will make sure that her land is secured. I will make sure that the economics are true, even though I get absolutely nothing out of it. Now that's a little more than just us saying, well, that was loving kindness. That sounds like a Hallmark card that you got. No, he's talking about some real economic risk here, and it's all going to Naomi, of whom he has absolutely no connection. Okay, it's pretty distant. And to Ruth, who is even further away because she's a foreigner. So what does that have to do with this upper story that we've been talking about? Well, in the midst of the light of the judges, this very dark period of time, when the people kept turning away from God, when the people rejected God, it's nice to see this illustration of loving kindness, a God who continues to sacrifice in spite of the fact he's getting nothing out of it. In spite of the fact that there is absolutely no gain for God in doing this, God cares for us, as Boaz cared for Ruth. Now, the other way that it moves our story forward is we have this period of the Judges which is very dark, very kind of anti-God. And here you have a foreign woman who is a widow. Okay, that's 2 strikes against her. Who throws in with a widowed mother-in-law. That's 3 strikes against her. She should be out. And while all of Israel doubts God's power to bring about an end to this famine, to bring about their providence, the care, a foreign woman says, your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. Wherever you go, I will go. Those are one of the surprising moments in the Bible, and there's a number of those, and we'll try to highlight those as we go through it. But that kind of surprise, that the faith doesn't come from the stalwarts, it doesn't come from the Hebrews, it comes from a foreigner. Now, where did she hear about this God? Well, she probably heard about it from her husband. They were married for 10 years before he died. Or maybe she heard about it from Naomi. Regardless of where she heard about this God, she has now chosen to follow him and him only. El Shaddai, the Almighty God. And that's the one that Ruth follows. That's a bright spot in the book of Judges. When everything else is dark, when everything else seems to be falling apart, all of a sudden you have God interjecting this and saying, and I'm going to give you a foreigner, one without an inheritance, to be the inheritance of all the Hebrews. How is that? Well, you can see how having this child, Obed, is a blessing to Naomi, right? It carries on her progeny, her inheritance, her bloodline. And you can see how it helps her out economically. She's not going to die of starvation because there's now someone who owns the land, because only men could own the land. And she's got Ruth and Boaz looking after her. In fact, I would imagine that with all of Boaz's resources, Naomi now is living like a queen. But that's not it. There's a deeper inheritance for the Hebrews. This Obed, this baby child that's given to Ruth, given to Naomi, is the father of Jesse. Now, in case you don't remember who Jesse was, his son is this kid called David. And David